Hello and welcome to my Bloomburrow limited set review. Today I'll be talking about the cards from the upcoming Bloomburrow expansion and how good I think they're going to be in limited, specifically draft for the most part. Hopefully the audio is fixed this time and I don't accidentally shut off my microphone 13 minutes in, unlike the last one. So we're going to try to not have that happen again, and we're going to maybe be a little faster going through the cards. If you haven't been here before, these are the tiers I use to grade the cards. It's a little different than many content creators that make, set reviews for limited. I like these. They, match my style of evaluating cards. Essentially, tier 1 is good, tier 5 is bad. And we're just going to get right into the ratings. So, first card is Banishing Light. It is a reprint, 2 and a white for an enchantment. When it enters, exile target non-land permanent an opponent controls until it leaves the battlefield. So a pretty standard Oblivion Ring, style effect. These effects are generally very good and limited, especially the fact that you can target non-land permanents is nice, really nice upside on this card. And yeah, I mean, like these type of effects are always sort of a tier 2 effect. It's efficient removal. Does get a little bit worse in this set specifically, I think, potentially due to the high number of like tokens that are going to be generated. So you may not, but like even in contexts like that have been like that in the past, these type of effects still tend to do pretty good, and I expect this one to be the same. Beza the Bounding Spring. 2 white for a 4/5. When it enters, create a treasure token. If an opponent controls more lands than you, you gain 4 life if they have more life than you. You create 2 blue 1/1 fish creature tokens if they have more creatures than you, and you draw a card if the opponent has more cards than you. So it's really hard for this to miss, basically. Like if you even get one of these things, the card would basically be like a tier 2 card by itself. The treasure token is like the worst mode by a lot, I think, but even that still would be good. I think it's also the mode that you're least likely to get, so I don't know. I think the modes that are easiest to activate are gaining 4 life and making 1/1s and drawing cards. All of those things are really good. It's like it's really hard to be in a spot where this is bad for you, because if you're ahead and you just play a 4-mana 4/5, like you're just gonna be still ahead. So like even in that like worst case scenario, you're still just playing a 4/5, and in that case your opponent probably has more cards in hand than you if you're like ahead on board, so you're probably drawing a card. So like that's kind of like your downside. This is just like kind of an efficient threat. Like this is just kind of a card that it doesn't fly under the radar text wise, but like it may fly under the radar. Like if you read the text and you're like, oh, this doesn't seem like none of these effects feel super powerful. Just like I feel like the rate is just really strong here, and I'm kind of gonna call it a bit of a rate monster there. Bravekin Duo, single white mana for a 1/1. You can pay 1 and tap it to give target creature +1/+1 until end of turn, activate only as a sorcery. So sorcery speed obviously hurts this considerably. Even so, the Valiant theme, I know after looking at the cards, having more time to digest this, I've come down on this. I originally had it in tier 3. I've just been too high on 1-drops kind of across the board for a little while. Like I've just kind of found myself evaluating them incorrectly for a little bit, because they were so good for so long, and just kind of be like, oh, 1 minute thing that has value into the late game, and that's not really what the last 2 formats have been about. Or even MKM wasn't really about that either. There just hasn't been like a format, like since LCI, 1-drops have been sort of like across the board pretty bad. So I've been a little too high on them. And I think they'll be a little bit better in this format probably, but this one, I just don't think triggering the Valiant with this is actually impactful enough. And if it didn't cost mana, I think actually like it might get there, but having costing mana, I think is just a bridge too far. Brightblade Stoat, 1 and a white for a 2/2 with first strike and lifelink. Solid French vanilla creature. I mean, we know lifelink is good and limited. A 2-drop that is a 2/2 with either of these abilities in the past would be like a tier 3 card. That has not really been true for like a year. 2-mana. If you just print 2-mana 2/2 first strike, it's probably a tier 3 card. Like they would just be tier 3 cards, but then you combine them and it's a really nice thing, and they get to be bumped up a tier to be tier 2. But yeah, I mean, it used to be like back in AFR. There was a couple of sets in a row where they printed a 2-mana 2/2 just lifelink, and that card was actually like one of white's better commons. That's not true anymore, but yeah, this is going to still be a good card. Builder's Talent, 1 and a white for a class. When it enters the battlefield, you create an 0/4 white wall with Defender. and you can pay 1 mana to upgrade it. And whenever one or more non-creature, non-land permanents you control enter, put a +1/+1 counter on target creature you control. And then you can pay 5 to upgrade it again, and then you return target non-creature, non-land permanent from your graveyard to the battlefield. So why I've rated this in tier 5 is primarily just the fact that it is hard to play a lot of non-creature, non-land permanents in your deck. A lot of your non-creature spells are going to be instants and sorceries, so obviously it's good with Banishing Light and whatnot, but that's like you just can't. There's just not a way to get like more than 6. It's really hard to get more than like 6 non-creature, non-land permanents into your deck, and that's like a max. Like that's like a really high case scenario. And if this only triggers, so if you pay 3 mana to level this up, and you only trigger it like on average 2 or 3 times a game, I just don't think that's good enough. So I think this is probably too slow, and reanimating a non-creature, non-land is just not something that you really care too much about in the vast majority of decks. I think you'd probably just be better off not playing it. Caretaker's Talent. 2 and a white for a class, and it has the ability whenever one or more tokens you control enter, draw a card. This ability triggers only once each turn, and you can pay 1 to level it up. When it becomes level 2, you create a token that's a copy of target token you control, and you can pay 4 or 3 to white. Creature tokens you control get +2/+2, and it just has that ability forever. This seems really strong to me for several reasons. I compared it to Takacia's Welcome. Takacia's Welcome is an enchantment that I thought would be bad before it came out in Brothers War, and then it actually ended up being a solid build around enchantment, and it was not even like you really was build around is kind of in quotation marks. You would just play it in any deck. There was enough, creatures that were small enough to trigger it that you would basically just be drawing a card every time you played a creature. I think this is going to be similar. There's so many cards, especially in white, that make tokens that this is just going to be essentially Takacia's Welcome, I feel like. It will draw you as many cards, and it even like enables itself, which is really strong. And in the late game, you can be like, well, I got 3 tokens on the board, I'm going to pay 4 mana, make them 3/3s. It's like, oh, that's really good. So I just kind of like this card, all aspects. The reason it's in tier 2 and not tier 1 is, of course, that it is a 3 mana spell that does not impact the board. So be advised that is why it is down a tier and not in tier 1, but I do think it has, obviously, the upside of being a tier 1 card if it's left unchecked. Just, this is a format that has some decks that, at least before my uninformed take, is that there's going to be some fast ones in this set, so I do think that this is not just going to win every single game that you play it. Carrot Cake, 1 and a white for a food. When it enters and when you sacrifice it, create a 1/1 white rabbit creature token and scry 1. And you can pay 2 and sacrifice it to gain 3 life because it's a food. So yeah, this thing just seems busted to me. Not busted, obviously, because I have it in tier 2 and not tier 1, but it's a really strong common. Any 2-drop, we've seen this type of archetype of card before, where it's a 2 mana artifact that just makes like 3 permanents over the course of the game, and it's just always really strong. Just getting this much material for 2 mana is a strong thing to do, and the amount of utility this card provides is extremely high. It interacts with all of the synergies in the entire format, basically, so you're obviously gonna play this in every deck, and it's gonna be a really strong card. Essentially, I don't think there's really any getting around it. Crumb and Get It. 1 white mana for an instant, you can gift a food. Target creature you control gets +2/+2 until end of turn. If the gift was promised, that creature also gains indestructible until end of turn. So, yeah, I mean, we've seen the 1 mana +2/+2, and it's generally good, but not anything amazing. And that's kind of, I don't see any reason to think this is going to be any different. The ability to give indestructible at the cost of a food is good, but tends to not be as relevant as you may think. A lot of times when you're using the +2/+2 to win combat, then you don't really need it to be indestructible. So it's kind of like that tends, and that's why I think it's fine that it's like gift thing. Like there's some very niche scenarios where like your opponent casts a removal spell, you cast this to protect your thing, and then you get to attack or whatever for a larger amount. That's something. Maybe that's like kind of the scenario that this is good. But yeah, nothing special. Dawn's Truce. 1 and a white for an instant, you gift a card. You and permanents you control Gain hexproof until end of turn. If the gift was promised, permanents you control also gain indestructible until end of turn. So, as we just kind of talked about, 1 mana to get something indestructible has its like uses, but generally isn't even like as relevant as maybe you think. And 2 mana to do it is not great. Now, hexproof and indestructible for 2 mana. If you were getting a card, that would be something that maybe would be interesting. But having to give your opponent a card to do that seems horrendous. And I don't know. This to me just doesn't seem. It just doesn't seem like where I want to be, personally. It's just too expensive. Like, you can't hold up 2 mana to do this and hope your opponent casts a removal spell. Just isn't. It's just not how it works. You can't just be doing that for the whole game. Dewdrop Cure. 2 and a white for a sorcery with gift a card. Return to target creature cards, each with mana value 2 or less, from your graveyard to the battlefield. If the gift was promised, instead return up to 3 creature cards this way. So obviously you could pay the gift to get an extra 2 mana creature. The problem is that you're not going to have 3 2 mana spells in your graveyard enough in white to do this. If this was like a black card, it would be like, oh, maybe you actually do get there, because there's a lot of ways to like mill and discard and surveil in black. But in white, there just isn't really any way to do that. And if you can't play this on 3, it's just kind of a disaster. Like, it's just kind of like not. It's a value card that doesn't actually really get you any value and requires a lot of like setup. And yeah, I mean, unfortunately, I just don't really see a home for this, because there's not like it's a. Ideally, what you want is to be sort of an attrition deck with a lot of 2-drops with ETBs that, like, interact with the board in some way. There's just not a ton of those. There's a lot of stuff that is, not actually creatures that are creatures. There's, like, stuff that make creature tokens. The creatures by themselves, you have to, like, pay costs. Like, I don't know. I just think that this set is kind of not the best place for this card, and it will not be very good. Driftgloom Coyote. 3 white for a 3/4. When it enters exile, target creature an opponent controls until it leaves. If that creature has power 2 or less, put a +1/+1 counter on this. Yeah, I mean, this card, we've just seen this type of card be very good for a very long time. Obviously, this is a little more expensive than we usually see. We usually see it be 3 or 4 mana. This is 5 mana. Okay, whatever. It's a little bit bigger to compensate for that. One of the very strong things you can do is, 5 mana, get rid of a token and make a 4/5. Like, that's a really good mode on this. Like, that's kind of like your floor, honestly, with this card. Like, that's kind of the floor in this set, is like, oh, I got rid of their token. That might not be the floor. I guess the floor is like exile their 2-drop or whatever. But like, this is. It's just, floor is just so high, and we've seen cards like this really strong for a long time. Again, one of the concerns that you can have with this is that it is a 5-drop, and so me evaluating it as a tier 1 card, which I do think that it is, it naturally will bump down other 5-drops. Just in white, it will make other 5-drops worse because it's an uncommon that is a tier 1 5-drop, and you can only have so many 5-drops in your deck. So, sort of a thing, like, sort of a meta thing to keep in mind with white 5-drops specifically is, like, this card existing means that the other ones are slightly worse because you will want to prioritize them less than this card. Essence Channeler. 1 and a white for a 2/1. As long as you've lost life this turn, it has flying and vigilance. When you gain life, put a +1/+1 counter on it. And when it dies, put its counters on target creature you control. So, this is one of those cards that, like, kind of looks like it always has flying. Like, it just kind of reads like, oh, this has, surely somewhere on this card the word, like, flying is, like, a thing. You know what I mean? Obviously it can get flying, but it's just kind of, like, feels like it always has flying. That's not the case. So, it only gets flying on turns in which you lose life, which is pretty much only going to be your turn. Obviously, like, post-combat on your opponent's turn, you could have it be a flying creature, which actually is probably downside. And whenever you gain life, you put a +1/+1 counter on it. Good, but it's not helping you do that at all. This to me just seems like a very prototypical, like, card that will be overrated. It has a lot of text that's flashy and like, oh man, this could be good if everything works out. But, like, everything working out is kind of not, like, never actually happens. Because, like, for everything, and for you to get the full value out of this card, it has to die. And you have to have another creature on board. Which not always the easiest to do. So, like that is a thing that like, happens a lot. Like, but it doesn't happen a lot when your opponent has control over it, which opponent kind of does with this thing. I think it's still a playable 2-drop. Does threaten to grow large in the right deck. I think there's plenty of enablers specifically in black for this. So in black white, I do think this is a card that is going to be good in that deck, but not so good that you're going to want to get into the deck for this. So that's why I have it in tier 3. I think it is a card that in just a random white deck is, you'll probably have some random ways to gain life. You'll probably have some ways to lose life. It may be able to gain flying. It may not. If you put one counter on it, that's probably good enough. But you really want 2, and yeah, that's kind of how I feel about it. Feather of Flight, another interesting one. 1 and a white for an enchantment. It has flash. It's an aura, and when it enters the battlefield, you draw a card. An enchanted creature gets +1/+0 and has flying. So the longer I look at this card, the more I dislike it. When you first see it, you're like, oh man, it's an aura that cantrips and gives flying. How could I not like it? And it's like, well, okay, it's 2 mana. It has all the problems that regular auras have, which is that you can get blown out. So it doesn't really have flash. Like, flash is kind of an illusion on this card, because like, what are you using the flash to do? It doesn't help you win combat. It helps you kill a thing that you were like 1 point short of killing and you were going to bounce off. That's just not a scenario that comes up very often. It does help you, like, you can flash it in and try to block a flyer, but the problem is your opponent's going to have mana up if they're good at the game and are attacking you. You know what I mean? Like, and so you can't really do that because you're just asking to get blown out. So it doesn't, like, the flash to me just seems not great. And you can play it on your turn, but then, like, I don't know. It it triggering Valiant is fine and all that, and that's cool, but I'm skeptical of this being great. I think it is playable as a result of having it in tier 3, but this is one of those cards I think that reads kind of good, but I think actually will play pretty bad. Similar to how like Faithlight played in MK, which is a card that I thought was going to be good, but I misevaluated, and I think a lot of people misevaluated as well, because we sort of missed some of the context for why previous cards similar to it had been good and why it like wasn't. This I think sort of falls into that camp of like not sure about it. Flowerfoot Swordsmaster. 1 white mana for a 1/2 with Offspring for 2. It has Valiant. Whenever this creature becomes the target of a spell or ability you control for the first time, mice you control get +1/+0. So it attacks as a 2/2 a lot. When you target it with something, cool. It can help you go really wide in red-white. It's a good 1-drop that is playable on 3. Not the best 3-drop of all time, but still an okay 3-drop, and I think you're not going to be unhappy with it. Tier 2 may be a little aggressive for this. I don't know. I like it. It's a good 1-drop. It is kind of one of those cards that like I'm not actually going to draft it at tier 2, and I'm just saying it's going to be tier 2, and then I'm going to like get into my first draft and like take the 2/2 lifelink over it every single time, and then I'm just going to never play this, and I'm like, eh. But I do think that on turn 3, this plus the other 1/1 is threatening. Like, it's a threatening thing to do. So, yeah. Harvest Dried. Like, I would take this over the other thing. So I should probably move that one down. Yeah, I don't know. Harvest Right Host. 2 and a white for a 3/3. When it or another rabbit you control enters, target creature you control gets +1/+0 until end of turn, and then you draw a card if this is the second time this ability is resolved. Notably, if you have multiple rabbits at the same time, it counts each one, which is sick. So yeah, this is just insane. Like, I don't know. Like, this, this is a debatable tier 1 for me. It just does so much. Like, it has an ETB, it's a threat past the ETB, it enables attacks, it targets your creatures. You're just going to play this in every white deck. I mean, you want rabbits, but there's enough rabbits that you're going to play just in white at common, and we'll see a couple of them shortly. But yeah, this is just a really strong card, and it just does it all by itself, right? Like it does, the turn you play this, you only need to play one other rabbit, and you can imagine scenarios on like turn 5 where you go this into 2-drop rabbit and to like hit your opponent for 5 and then draw a card. Like that's just insane, and that happens. I don't know. It's not like outside of the range of possibilities with this. At the end of the day, it is a 3 mana 3/3 by itself that requires you to have played a 2-drop in your deck. But it turns out that playing 2 drops is really good, and you are incentivized to do that. So you will try to have like you will. That's something you already want to do. So this is incentivizing you to do things that you already want to do, which is great. Talked about rabbits. Hop to it. 2 and a white sorcery. 3/1/1 rabbits. Very simple card. They took a mana off of Captain's Call. Captain's Call's spinning in its grave right now. Yeah, I mean, it's clearly a strong card, right? Like, you're getting 3 permanents for 3 mana. I kind of talked about, how that is just inherently valuable. The fact that you're getting 3 tokens and that they're rabbits is also relevant. There are lots of cards that care about rabbits and lots of cards that care about tokens. So, I think you're going to play this in any white deck. I have a hard time imagining you would ever cut it. It just seems so efficient. But, it's going to obviously be better in green-white. Another banger, Intrepid Rabbit, 2 and a white for a 3/2 with Offspring for a single colorless mana. When this enters, target creature you control gets +1/+1 until end of turn, and that applies to both rabbits. This might be my favorite art in the entire set, by the way. It's just really, like, you want to play this on, you're going to play this on 4 almost every time, partially because there's so many good 3-drops in the set, but also partially because like you just want to get max value. You just got to I always have to get the max value. And yeah, this is just going to enable you to attack for a huge amount of damage on turn 4 and make 2 bodies, and they're both rabbits, and one of them's a token. Like it just does it all. Like it just really does it all. And sort of a big part of the reason why I think white is probably my favorite to be best color. I would guess like my pre-format favorite to be best color. Just there's tons of, like, we just saw 3 back-to-back cards of like that's a banger, that's a banger, that's a banger, and then the card that I in front of it that I graded as tier 2, where I'm like, is this a banger? Like I kind of think it's better than an average common, like is it uncommon? But I'm like, is this actually a banger? I feel like it's worse than these other 3-drops, but I think the flexibility may just get it there. Might also be wrong about that. Jackdaw Savior, 2 and white for 3/1 flying. Whenever it or another creature with flying dies, return another creature card with lesser mana value from your graveyard to the battlefield. So you have to have a creature with lesser mana value for this to like do something when it dies, but a 3 mana 3/1 flyer is kind of like a good rate. It's not a great rate. Like it is a rate that I would consider to be moderate. Like if they printed 3 mana 3/1 flyer, I'd be like, you could probably play that. And this does have considerable upside over a 3 mana 3/1 flyer. You can engineer ways for other creatures with flying to die. I'm giving it like the benefit of the doubt. We are a little bit classist here. We give the rarity symbol a little bit of a benefit of the doubt in terms of strength. We say, okay, you know what, we trust you a little bit on this. So I do think it's like, if you had to make me rank like these 5 cards in a row that we've seen here, I think I would put like I don't even know, like these 3 are clearly like good. And this one's good, but I don't know how good. And then the 1/2 is like I'm making a bet on it being good, but I'm not sure. So yeah, I think this is fine. Like I think it's gonna kind of do what it says on the front side. If you have good 2s, like there's another card that's like, hey, you want to have 2-drops in your deck. You would like to trade them off by attacking. It's like, yes, this is what you want to do in Magic in 2024. Jolly Gerbils. 1 and a white for a 2/3. When you give a gift, draw a card. So, the reason I don't like this card as much as the previous cards, despite it being an efficient 2-drop, there are several reasons. One of which is that it has no types that matter. Hamster Citizen, not types that are relevant in this set. This is kind of a type-related set, so that I think is relevant. Another thing that I don't like about it is that I think most of the cards that ask you to give a gift are bad, or at the very least, like, you there aren't a ton of them, and I don't think there's a ton of like the best common, for example, is like none of the colors best common is a card that has gift associated with it. So it's like if these cards aren't super desirable and you can't have a critical mass of them in your deck, then how is this card going to be good? And I'm like, oh yeah, it's probably not. And a 2-mana 2/3 vanilla, which this I'm kind of saying this is not great. It's fine, like it's fine. And this has some upside. Like a 2-mana 2/3 vanilla is probably a tier 4 card. Maybe it's a tier 3 card. I don't know. It depends on if it has types or not. This one does not. So that's again why I have like kind of reservations. We have reservations about this card. But it also like this can get people to do things that are bad for no reason. Like you aren't really getting an advantage when you pay a gift for no reason. So let's say like you could cast a gift spell and you could do the same thing without giving the gift, but you choose to give the gift because you have to have this card in play. You're actually not like this isn't actually doing anything. It's just you draw a card, your opponent draws a card, right? And obviously they can get a fish or get a food or whatever. So in some scenarios it is still doing something, but like it you shouldn't go out of your way to give gifts just to draw a card off of this card. It's basically what I'm saying, and that to me makes me think it's not very good. Life Creed Duo. 1 and a white for a 1/2 with flying. Whenever another creature enters, you draw a card. Other creature you control enters, you draw a card. It's a 2-drop, so I think it's going to see some play, but kind of a black-white only card. And in that deck, I think it could be playable, but not super exciting, and that's why I have it in tier 4. Like it's just too slow and a little bit below rate for like just good, you know, to have just good status. I think in black-white it will see some play, but everywhere else I'm not really a believer. Mabel's Metal. 1 and a white for an instant. Target creature gets +2/+2 until end of turn. Up to one other target creature gets +1/+1 until end of turn. So essentially this is a 2-mana +3/+3 in white, which actually you don't get very often. It's spread over 2 bodies. So this triggers Valiant twice. For if you have 2 Valiant creatures, cool. That's like a thing that will come up sometimes. Not super often, but sometimes. And it's just like it's just gonna win 2 combat. Like you just win 2 combat sometimes, or push a little bit extra damage, or win a combat, push some damage, or like win 2 combats, or double trade up, or I don't know. Like it just to me this just seems like a lot of flexibility. Now there's like lack of flexibility in some areas, but you can just cast it 2. If you need to, you can just cast it for 2 mana +2/+2, and that's not a complete disaster. And sometimes you just gotta. So yeah, I think this is fine. Mouse Trappa. 2 and a white for a 3/2 with flash. It has Valiant. Whenever it becomes the target of a spell or ability you control for the first time each turn, tap target creature an opponent controls. So Bola Slinger-esque. I think this is actually worse than Bola Slinger, believe it or not, because it doesn't do the thing by itself, and it doesn't do it on like ETB. That Bola Slinger didn't either, but you could back up onto something that did. Whatever. But the flash is nice. I don't love, like, 3/2 is kind of not, like, it doesn't, you know, it doesn't spark joy, you know, it doesn't make me excited, but I don't think it's bad by any means. I think it's a decent card, a playable card. You're gonna find some utility for it, I think, in pretty much any white deck, but I don't think you're gonna ever be like, man, this is the best card in my deck, so I think it's maybe not the best. Nettleguard. 1 and a white for a 3/1 with Valiant. When it becomes the target of a spell or ability you control for the first time each turn, it gets +0/+2 until end of turn, and you can pay 1 to sacrifice it and destroy an artifact or enchantment. So we've seen this type of deal with Cathar Commando. It had Flash instead of the other ability. Yeah, I mean, getting to attack as a 3/3 sometimes is like really minor upside, but sometimes you want that upside, and that's cool. Otherwise, just having some just passive artifact and enchantment interaction in your deck is always good. Kind of randomly hoses people that are playing the class cards, so kind of an inherent nerf to those cards. be advised. But like, yeah, like this is just the type of card, like solid bread and butter card, gonna go in pretty much every deck, and you're gonna be pretty happy about it. Parting Gust. White for an instant. You can gift a tapped fish. Exile target non-token creature. If the gift wasn't promised, return that creature to the battlefield under its owner's control with a +1/+1 counter on it at the beginning of the next end step. And if the gift was promised, of course you just exile it. So obviously the 2-mana exile something, give your opponent a fish at instant speed is very bad. Even though it is double, including the fact that it's double pipped. I would put that card as tier 5. I would never play that card. The reason I put this in tier 4 is that obviously the other mode exists where you can bounce your own thing and get value. And like having a little bit of modality bumps it up a little bit, but I think the modality is such that it's still more bad than good in the grand scheme of things. And I'm just never a fan of these types of cards in general, so I'm gonna be grading it low. Pilated Provisioner. I didn't pronounce that right. 4 and a white for a 3/4 flyer. When it enters, put a +1/+1 counter on target creature you control without flying. Yeah, I mean this type of archetype of card they've kind of figured out is a good thing to have at 5 mana in white. They kind of like this. It's been good every time they printed it. Never too never busted or anything, but always solid role player. Tends to be pretty underrated. Like I think this card's going to be underrated for the duration of the format. I would be surprised if it's overrated. I just would be shocked if I'm not playing this more than the average person because people just don't respect this type of card, and for some reason, and it's always pretty good. So I think it's going to still be pretty good. Nothing to write home about, but also a card that you're going to want to play in a lot of your decks. Rabbit Response. 2 white for an instant. Creatures you control get +2/+1 until end of turn. If you control a rabbit, scry 2. So obviously not quite as good as the one from MKM that literally allowed you to create a clue token. That's pretty good, but still a playable card. I think that was the reason that card was so good was that part of the reason was that you could amass a wide board due to a lot of your creatures having ward. So like you could play a 3-mana spell and your opponents like wouldn't just be able to kill it. And then you could flip it. Like, Dogwalker was like a great thing. There's just lots of ways to go wide. This set has lots of ways to go wide, but only in, like, green-white. So in green-white, I think you're going to play this, and it's probably going to be pretty good for you. And in decks that aren't green-white, it is probably not good. Scrying 2, when you have a rabbit, is nice upside. Maybe I could move this to tier 3. I just think, like, you're not going to pick it highly, so I'm moving it in tier 4. Repel Calamity. 1 and a white for an instant, destroy target creature with power or toughness 4 or greater. So, I think these type of effects usually aren't very good, but I think the combination of the two on one card at 2 mana I think is reasonable. It's going to be hard to find a deck that doesn't have a creature that can get hit by this, or a couple of creatures that can get hit by this in 2024. Like, there's just... Your opponent's going to have something that gets hit by this. I do think this card is actually worse than, Destroy Evil from DMU. Destroy Evil, I think, was actually a better card than this. But I still think this is going to be fine. And it's still, like, playable. Not amazing and has diminishing returns, but a playable card. Probably going to be overrated. Salvation Swan. 3 and a white for a 3/3 flash flying. When it or another bird enters, exile to 1 target creature you control without flying. Return it to the battlefield under its owner's control with a flying counter on it at the beginning of the next end step. So obviously this is nice, 4 mana 3/3 flash flyer. The Restoration Angel effect is good, but it only works on non-flyers, which in white, like a lot of the non-flyers in white are tokens or things that make tokens. So it's kind of like, I don't know. I don't know how to feel about that. Like, I'm not... Like, I have concerns about that being, like, a thing that is functional. So, like, that's kind of why they don't put this in Tier 1. Is that I'm like, is this really Tier 1? Is it, like, busted amazing? Obviously, it can do it has some busted scenarios where it can be really, really good. And I think it is, on average, good. I think it's a card you can first pick, and you're going to be happy to first pick most of the time. I think on average, like, I guess it's like, is this actually better than the Stoat? Which is the 2-drop with first strike and lifelink, and I'm like, I don't know, I could see either one of them being better, statistically speaking, and that's kind of what I'm trying to base my evaluation on, is the statistically speaking value of the cards, and I'm like, It could go either way there. I mean, 2-drop, they're just inherently valuable. It's a 4-drop. You can't have too many 4s at times. And it can just be awkward, but it does give the thing flying, so that's the thing as well. I could, like, you could persuade me to move this up to tier 1, and I'm not going to be mad at you. Like, it's probably like I'm probably trying to be a little too harsh on it, for the sake of being harsh, but the card does have some flaws. Season of the Burrow. 3 white for a sorcery. Choose up to 5 paw print worth of modes. For 1, create a 1/1 rabbit. 2, exile non permanent. Its controller draws a card. 3, return target permanent with mana value 3 or less from your graveyard to the battlefield with an indestructible counter on it. So, this is really sweet. All of the modes are relevant. Specifically, the first and last mode are very, very good. Just making a creature with indestructible is just so annoying for your opponent to deal with, because they just can't ever attack. Like, they're just never attacking you ever until they deal with it. And yeah, you can also just make 5 rabbits, which is also good. So, like, all the modes on this just seem really strong to me, and I really like the card. It seems flexible, seems strong. You have to remove your opponent's stuff. You can also remove your stuff and then, like, draw cards. If you want to, like, cash your token into a card, you can do that too. Maybe wouldn't super recommend it, but you can do it if you have to. Seasoned Warren Guard. 1 white mana for a 1/2. When it attacks while you control a token, it gets +2/+0. So a purely aggressive card. Obviously doesn't block ever or anything. But you're basically always going to have a token. Maybe not necessarily on turn 2, but I think, there's going to be a lot of decks, specifically the rabbit deck, which is green-white, that's going to be able to make a token on turn 2. And a 1 mana 3/2 is a really strong card. Even if it's not on turn 2 and it's on turn 3, a 3/2 is going to be relevant for the entire game when you're attacking, and it's just a lot. Like, it just leads to the capability of having, like, nut draws in some spots where you're like, okay, well, this is just taking over the game now. And that's it. I have only put it in tier 3 because, again, there is sort of the downside of sometimes you miss, and it's just like sometimes just kind of is a 1 mana 1/2, and you're, like, sad. But I think that is not going to happen that often in this format, but I think it's going to happen enough to keep it from being, tier 2. Shrike Force. 2 and a white for a 1/3 with flying, double strike, and vigilance. So I've graded this very highly for a card that is French vanilla, but again, I'm kind of a believer. Like, there's a lot of ways to buff power and toughness in the set, so I think the double strike, like, is going to be really threatening. It has flying, it has vigilance. Your opponent, like, it can block well. It's just an absolute nuisance. Like, it's on the battlefield. It's controlling the board on your turn, on your opponent's turn. It's doing it all, and I do really think that this is going to be pretty solid. Like, this is going to be a solid card. And yeah, that's how I feel about it. Sonar Strike. 1 and a white for an instant. It deals 4 damage to target attacking, blocking, or tapped creature. If you lose, you gain 3 life if you control a bat. So, yeah, I mean, if you control a bat part is somewhat relevant. I think primarily that's a black-white thing, or whatever. There are bats in white, but a lot of them are bad. So I think primarily it's going to be black-white, and this type of removal, not very good in your aggressive decks, pretty good in your control decks. This one's even better in your controlling decks. So in the right style of deck, I think this is a very, very good card, but I think in the average deck, it's going to be pretty bad. So I've kind of just put it in the middle here. In some decks good, some decks bad. Sort of a soft build-around type card. Star Charter. 3 and a white for a 3/1 with flying. At the beginning of your end step, if you gained or lost life this turn, look at the top 4 cards of your library. You may reveal a creature card with power 3 or less from among them and put it into your hand. Put the rest on the bottom of your library in a random order. So the problems with this card are many. There is it's a 4 mana 3/1 flyer, so that's bad. That's not where you want to be. In addition to that, it needs help to trigger its ability, and it's, like, not entirely clear that that's going to happen every single time. Obviously, there's cards that this works with, but it's just that the body is so small. and it relies on like a lot of help. And like you can still miss. It's not like you can't miss with this. You can only hit creature cards power 3 or less, and it goes to your hand, which is good. Like you draw, like okay. If this just was 4 mana 3/1 flying draw a card, how good would that card be? Tier 3 maybe. It wouldn't be like amazing or anything. It would be okay. So like this is worse than that. So that's why I have it in tier 4 basically. Starfall Invocation. 3 white for a sorcery. You can gift a card. Destroy all creatures if the gift was promised. Just return a creature card put into your graveyard to the battlefield this way, under your control. So it's a Wrath, and if you have something you really want to keep, you can pay a card to keep it. Generally not an amazing trade, but can be okay at times. There are some spots where you're going to want to do that. I think most of the time you're not going to want to do that. I'm not a huge fan of Wraths. I often underrate them, but underrate is subjective because like I don't play super well with them. Like I just am not very good at playing with them. Historically, it's not my strength. I generally like to try to be on the board all the time. So Wraths aren't sort of like naturally how I interface with the game. But yeah, this card's fine. Like I don't love it and don't hate it. Thistledown Players. 2 and a white for a 3/3 when it attacks, untap target non-land permanent. So it's a Valiant Enabler. It's a 3/3 for 3. There's so many, but there's better 3-drops you can play in your deck. You can play this. It's not a disaster, but not exciting by any means. That's about it. Valley Quest Caller. 1 and a white for a 2/3. Whenever one or more rabbits, bats, birds, or mice enter, scry 1. You control, obviously. Other of those types also get +1/+1. So it's a lord for basically all the white creatures, not quite all of them, but most of them. And it also means that you scry 1 when another one of those enter. It's a 2-drop. Just seems like a really, really efficient card on rate. And 2-mana lords tend to be very good. So no complaints from me on this one. Warren Elder. 1 and a white for a 2/2. You can pay 3 and a white to give creatures you control +1/+1 until end of turn. It's a rabbit, so it's obviously supposed to go in green-white. Yeah, this card is much worse than the Unicorn from HBG, which was 1 mana that did this, but also gave Vigilance. 1 mana versus 2 mana is a considerable change, and obviously, like this is still, I think this is still playable and fine. And again, Unicorn was really, really good. But I think Unicorn was really, really good, partially because it was a 1-drop. This being a 2-drop, I'm like, I don't know. Like, a 1-mana 1/2 is about as on rate as a 2-mana 2/2. It's a little worse. Like, it's a little bit more on rate than a 2-mana 2/2. And it just fits into the curve better, so I don't know. I'm skeptical of this being amazing. I think it'll be fun. I think you can play this. It may just be as good as... It might just be the second coming of Unicorn, and I should move it up a tier. And I probably should just move it up a tier. Because Unicorn was so good. Like, it was so good. Even when they upped it to 5 mana, it was still good. And like this. But, like, not giving Vigilance is actually, like... How big of a deal is that? It's kind of a big deal. Yeah, I'm gonna leave it where it is. Maybe I'll just get burned. That's okay. I will die on this hill for no reason. Warren Warleader. 2 white for a 4/4 with Offspring for 2. When you attack, choose 1. You create a 1/1 white rabbit that's tapped and attacking, or attacking creatures you control get +1/+1 until end of turn. Yeah, I mean, like, classic, like, really, really strong card, like, comes down, has immediate impact if you have decent attacks. If you don't have decent attacks, you can bump your creatures to make sure you have decent attacks. If you do have decent attacks already, great, you get to make a rabbit. If you aren't making rabbits, that's fine too. It just seems really strong to me. Yep, just has immediate impact on the board and makes your board really big. Wax Wane Witness. 3 and a white for a 2/4 with Flying and Vigilance. Whenever you gain or lose life during your turn, it gets +1/+0 until end of turn. I need to move this. I probably should swap this and the rabbit, because I think this is probably worse than the rabbit because it's a 4-drop. But yeah, I mean, it's fine. Like, Flying and Vigilance is a good combo. A 2/4 is a solid stat line there. 2/4 Flying for 4. I don't love. I think it's probably better than a 3/3 Flying for 4 on average in 2024 because the 3/3 isn't blocking particularly well, and neither is, like, the 2/4 at least survives and it blocks stuff, whereas the 3/4 or the 3/3 just kind of dies. Vigilance is actually pretty big because it means you can, like, get damage in. Your life total can change considerably. It is kind of a beater. So I don't know. I'm putting some respect on its name, but I'm also cautiously pessimistic. Like, I'm cautiously optimistic. I'm like, this could be tier 3, but actually I'm probably going to pick it as if it's worse than this because I don't know, you know. I mean, it is always with set reviews. Like, I can review a card, but then when I see it in the pack, I'm going to be like, I don't want that card. Disgusting. I rated this what? Who cares? I don't want it. So, like, that's probably going to happen with this and a lot of cards. It's kind of like there's a bit of a vibe check when you actually see the card in the pack, and on the battlefield. So, yeah. And the final white card is Whiskervale Forerunner. 3 and a white for a 3/4 with Valiant. When it becomes the target of a spell ability you control for the first time each turn, look at the top 5 cards of your library. You may reveal a creature card with mana value 3 or less from among them. You may put it onto the battlefield if it's your turn. If you don't put it onto the battlefield, put it into your hand. Put the rest on the bottom of your library in a random order. So, this ability is slow, and there isn't a ton of things that do Valiant for free. There are some, but there's not a ton. And so on turn 4, this is basically just a 4-mana 3/4, which is very bad. And it's very easy to just kill it. And it doesn't really have any immediate, like, it doesn't really block. It blocks okay. It blocks okay. And I'm just like, I feel like this kind of just dies. And obviously, like, when you get to untap and target it with the thing, great. But you kind of are, like, hoping that it's kind of like, ooh, if I untap, it's going to be really, really good. And the body isn't so bad that this is just, like, bad by itself. I should probably move this up to tier 3, maybe. Just because it is, like, a 4-mana 3/4. A 4-mana 3/4 is pretty bad, though, man. Like, 4-mana 3/4 in 2024 is just not very good. And I think I'm going to leave it down here just as a statement of my disgust, to be honest with you. It is a value creature. It does generate value if you can, like, go off with it. It's just kind of like, is that actually what you want to be doing in your Valiant decks? I feel like your Valiant decks want to be, like, hitting your opponent in the face, and this card is just not hitting your opponent in the face at all. So that's why I'm kind of down on it. And that's it. That's the white cards. Hopefully this time I actually recorded audio all the way to the end and it actually gets uploaded, because I am now going to have to do an entire another round, another couple of an extra. I'm gonna have to do some extra videos this time, so my voice is going to just be completely toasted. But that's life. That's the way of the world, you know. Like, you got to do what you got to do. If you enjoyed, there's other set review content for this setup, and, you know, there should be more coming. And see you next time.